Please state your full name and present work address.
My full name is Michael Scott Rogers, Rogers, and my work address is United States Fleet Cyber Command at 9800 Savage Road, Suite 6586, Fort Meade, Maryland 20755 6586.
Why did you join the military, and why did you pick the Navy in particular?
Well, in my case, I didn't come from a military family, although my father had been in the National Guard. But I grew up in the city of Chicago, a long way from the water. But I liked the idea of being part of something bigger than myself. I liked the idea of service to the nation. And with regard to the Navy, I read a lot of Napoleonic era sea stories when I was a small boy, and decided by the time I was 10 or 11 years old that being a naval officer and driving ships was what I really was going to want to do with my life. And I really particularly liked the fact that the idea of responsibility as an officer, the idea of integrity and right and wrong was always very important to me in my life, and I really thought the Navy stressed that in its leaders. And the idea of being a captain at sea, a commanding officer, I thought would give me a great chance to really apply that concept of right and wrong and do it in a way that allowed me to team with a crew as well as serve my country. So that's what led me to the Navy.
What were your first days in the service like?
Well, my first assignment as a commissioned officer was in 1981. I reported to a destroyer out of Norfolk, Virginia, which was a lot of fun. You know, you're on a warship, so you're a young person. I was 21 years old when I reported aboard. It was a crew of about 350, a wardroom group of officers of about 30. We were all about 20 of us were the same age at the same stage in our lives, so it was just great. All of us growing up together, all of us visiting around the world, doing interesting operations at sea, deploying around much of the world, and having fun in a lot of really interesting places. So it was a lot of fun, and I got to work with a lot of men and women. Although at that time, to be honest, mostly men, because in 1981, when I started this journey in uniform, women were not authorized to serve at sea and combatant. So that first destroyer I was on was an all-male crew, and that has clearly changed over time. Women now serve on almost every platform afloat, really, except for submarines, and even that's changing right now. So that's been a great development for us as a Navy. But it was a lot of fun, and I met my wife during that tour while I was on Liberty on that ship one night. So that was a great time for me.
How many duty stations had you served at before getting assigned to NSGA Winter Harbor, and what was your rate and rank when you got there?
Right. I probably had been, at the time that I reported aboard in 1998, I had been in the Navy, let's see, about 17 years at that time. In those 17 years, I'd probably been in 9 different, let me think about this real quick. 11. I had been at 11 previous duty sites or commands prior to reporting aboard Naval Security Group activity Winter Harbor. And I was a commander, an 05, at about the 17-year mark in service when I reported aboard.
Do you remember arriving at Winter Harbor and what that was like?
Yeah, I had never been to Maine before. I'd never been down east. I had never been to Schoodic before I got this job. So the first day I showed up in June of 1998 was the first time in my life that I'd ever been up there. And I can still remember driving down the Park Road to get there and thinking, wow, how beautiful is this place? I was very fortunate. My boss, in the job I had before I went up to Maine, I was down in Fort Meade, Maryland. In fact, where I am today, the same building I work in today was one I worked in 1998. My boss at that time was a 2-star admiral who, when he had been a commander, had been the commanding officer of NSGA Winter Harbor. And I worked for him as his aide. And one of the things that, as he was getting ready to retire, he said to me, my family and I love my time in Maine. I'm going to do you and Dana, my wife, one of the greatest favors I could ever do, Mike, and I'm going to send you up to command at NSGA Winter Harbor, Maine. I'd never been there before, didn't know anything about it, but he was certainly right. I consider myself a very fortunate man because of my time up there.
How do you remember that people entertained themselves, and what did you do when not on duty?
Well, for sailors, members of the military, you would do parties in your quarters with your fellow sailors. You would go out in town. You would do a lot of family events. I used to love the fact that at night when the park was closed, my family and I, we'd go walking out to Schoodic Point, at 8 or 10 o'clock at night, pitch black. Particularly in the off season in the winter, I really loved it. Just pitch black. You could see a million stars in the sky, total blackness, and there was nobody around. We would just walk from our quarters. We lived right on the main base. I lived in the Schoodic in the Rockefeller House, or the Rockefeller Building, out on Schoodic Point. The commanding officer's quarters were a portion of one of the wings, and so I lived in the Rockefeller Building for the 2 years I was out there, which I loved. I got involved with Boy Scouts. For me personally, I got involved with Boy Scouts. I had two sons with us when we were there. One of them was old enough to be in Boy Scouts, was about 10 when we first got there, so I was a Boy Scout volunteer. Then I got into the Hammond Hall Players. I always liked theater and stuff when I grew up, so I did that when I was there for fun out in the community. We met people out in town, so we'd go do stuff out in town with different people, run up to Bangor every once in a while to go see a movie, or run over to MDI to go hiking over at the Maine side at Schoodic, at the national park. So pretty much what everybody else did. A lot of mountain biking, a lot of running. I love working out, and that was a great place. I would mountain bike all over the place. I'd go running on the park road every day. It was great.
So, what do you remember about living in the Rockefeller Building, and what were the quarters like there?
Number one, I love the history. It's just a beautiful building. I can remember thinking to myself, how many people during their career in the United States Navy can say that they lived in the middle of a national park in one of the most beautiful places in the United States? And while doing so, they lived in a building built for the Navy by John D. Rockefeller. And that was an architectural marvel when it was built, in the sense of the level of commitment and the craftsmanship that he put into that building, that he modeled after the French Renaissance. It was modeled after a French Renaissance hunting lodge style, using the same kind of materials that he had used in his large mansion complex on Mount Desert Island itself. So cypress wood, beautiful tiling. So I really loved living in the building. I just thought it was a neat piece of history. When the building was first built back in the 1930s, it in fact had been not just the headquarters building for the Navy site there, but it had been the barracks. It had been everything. It was the one building that was built to originally start the site. Because the history of the place is the Navy used to have a similar site over on Mount Desert Island. And in the 1920s, John D. Rockefeller and several of his wealthy friends there, who owned the large properties, approached the Secretary of the Navy, Josephus Daniels, about moving the Navy out of Mount Desert Island. And as we were getting into the early stages of the Depression in the early 1930s, Josephus Daniels, the then Secretary of the Navy, told John D. Rockefeller, be willing to do it, but we just don't have the money. And John D. Rockefeller, is only a multimillionaire can do, said to the Secretary of the Navy, well, I'll tell you what, if I build you a site on the other side of Frenchman's Bay, would that be enough? And the Navy said, sure, if you want to buy the land, clear it out, you want to put the equipment up that we need, we'd be more than glad to do it. And that's what happened, and that's what led to the building of the site. That's how Rockefeller, bought the land. He had his people clear it off, built a site for the United States Navy to move into, which we did. We moved from Mount Desert Island over to Schoodic Point. And then over time, as the site got bigger, as we added more missions out there, as the footprint of the base got bigger, we built literally a self-contained little town with a lot of other buildings and facilities out there just besides the Rockefeller building.
What were the surrounding towns like when you were stationed at Winter Harbor?
Well, we had several housing areas, 3 housing areas out in town in Winter Harbor itself. We had the main headquarters area out at Schoodic Point. And then we also had an operating location where part of the mission was actually conducted out at the Korea site between Gouldsboro and Korea. So, Gouldsboro large but spread out. I can remember driving out every day. I would drive from Schoodic out to the mission site, past the past the Prospect Harbor Lighthouse and the communications site there, and keep driving out to our facility. Korea was a tiny little fishing hamlet, still is in many ways, but I used to like to drive out there just take a look at it. I always thought it was a beautiful place. Winter Harbor has always had a segment of its population that's seasonal out at Grindstone. Those individuals have been coming and going, living there as summer residences for decades, for multiple generations of families. It was always fun to see them come in the summer. Many of them relatively wealthy, but they were willing to share their wealth. They were willing to apply their wealth to help the community. So whether it was Mr. Dixon and the Dixon family, or others out there who did great things for the community, that was always great to see. And it was always great to work with the community, whether I was spending time with Winter Harbor, working with the schools, working with the police chief, working with the selectmen. It was always really enjoyable. Ellsworth, kind of is the crossroads of down east, was an area that you have a lot of people running up to run errands and do other things. Bangor, was probably the big city. The Southwest Harbor and Bar Harbor over at MDI were always nice places. They slowed down a lot in the winter, but I actually enjoyed them. I didn't like MDI during the season in the summer because it was always so crowded with tourists. I really liked it in the off season in the winter. And then Cherry Field and other places further down east, just a lot of beautiful things to go see.
Did you do any long-distance sightseeing in Maine?
I went up into the county multiple times. Whether it's up in Katahdin or other areas, I went up to Quebec twice while I was there. Never took the ferry over to Nova Scotia. Always wish I had done that. And then went up to Campobello and down east. Took further down east, multiple trips, to Sebago and other areas down south, down to Portland. My wife really liked Portland and Brunswick, and in fact, because at the time, not only did I have those commands up in Winter Harbor, but I also had a detachment down at the Naval Air Station in Brunswick, so I would run down to Brunswick at least every other month to go to see my team down there. So.
Do you recall any humorous or unusual events that occurred during your time at Winter Harbor?
Always lots of fun. In some ways, I guess the biggest thing in some ways was Y2K, and then the new millennium. I still remember New Year's, welcoming the new century. And I was stationed at Winter Harbor then. I always loved that. Just the shows and the other things I participated in. Halloween and trick-or-treating, because while we were out on the point there at Schoodic Point, we had a lot of families that lived on base, a lot of families out in town. The block parties we would have in officers in chief housing in the housing area, because we had 3 housing areas in Winter Harbor itself downtown, in the town. One of them was all officer and chief petty officer housing, and we used to do a lot of parties and block parties, a lot of outdoor block parties down there. That was always a lot of fun.
What do you remember about the barracks and of the food served at the galley on the base?
I will be honest and tell you that I thought the galley was in some ways the very best thing out there. I ate in that galley every day for lunch. If we had visitors, I would always take them to the galley to eat because I just thought it was great to see Navy men and women as well as our local civilian hires, the food that they put together. I love the fact that every day I could sit down and talk to the men and women of the crew. I love the fact that the ranger, park ranger ate in there every day. I love the fact that a lot of the, our civilian employees would eat in there. It was just a great chance to sit down and talk to everybody every day. In fact, the saddest thing, and I often tell the people that are still there, I understand why you tore down the barracks, but boy, I sure would have kept the galley if I had been king for a day. It was such a neat facility. And it was kind of the hub in some ways of the social life during the day because you'd run into everybody out there. Everybody would go to the galley, no matter what they were doing.
What did you think of the people you served with at Winter Harbor?
Great people. Many of whom that was 15 years ago now, and many of them I still stay in close contact with, both the people I served with as well as friends out in town that are still our friends. I still go up. If my wife had her way, we would have never left Maine because, in fact, I bought a couple acres on Frenchman's Bay, so I own land up the Summer Harbor Road in Gouldsboro, but right across the line from Winter Harbor. I hope to come back and build something that I can spend, summers and then hopefully ultimately retire in up there sometime in the next few years. My wife constantly tells me if she could go to Maine, she would do it today and just leave me back here in Washington to do my thing in the Navy, and then I could come up and join her whenever I was ready to retire. But I'm not there yet, but we love it. We love it.
Did you make many friends in the civilian community?
Oh, yeah. Whether it was Pete at the Five and Dime, whether it was people that I acted with in the Hammond Hall Players, whether it was, some of the fishermen we got to know, being a volunteer for Lobster Fest every year. I really always enjoyed that. Working with the police chief. I used to be a volunteer computer instructor in the school, which I really loved. So I got to sit down and talk to kids and their, parents every week. I taught a computer course I think I did it for the second and third grade, just some basic computer stuff. That was always a lot of fun.
What was the primary mission of the base when you were stationed at NSGA Winter Harbor?
Well, we never got into the specifics of the mission, so I still won't do it. But, we were there to be part of the defense of the nation and to take advantage of the location. It's a very place located on the eastern edge of the United States. It's also got a good northern latitude. It's also quiet electromagnetically, so it was a nice environment for some of the missions that we did. So it was well suited to what we wanted to do.
Do you think the base was successful in accomplishing its mission during the time you were stationed there?
Yeah. The fact that it closed just reflected some of the systems that we had operated. New technology enabled us to do it differently. New technology enabled us to do it, quite frankly, a little cheaper. Because over time, we had built a base that at its height probably had 700 employees, military in uniform. When I first reported aboard, we were in June of 1998, we were at about 650 people, employees, military and civilian. It had a great history, boy. For a medium-sized, out-of-way kind of place, 3 commanding officers from there became admirals. 1 executive officer became an admiral. We used to joke within our specialty in the Navy that Winter Harbor, for a small place, and there were many places within my specialty that were much larger in terms of number of people, and yet Winter Harbor produced a really high percentage of flag officers. And in fact, now I'm a 3-star admiral. My command master chief, who is the senior enlisted individual in my organization, is a master chief petty officer that I served with when he was a first-class petty officer up in Winter Harbor. We often joke about that. 15 years later, look where we find ourselves now.
Were you the commanding officer the entire time you were stationed at Winter Harbor?
I was, from June of 1998 to June of 2000.
What are your fondest memories of the time you spent at Winter Harbor?
The people and the beauty and serenity of the place would probably be the biggest things. I mean, it was hard to have a bad day when every day I could go running along the park road and just see the beauty of Maine. It was hard to have a bad day.
And
Go ahead.
your worst memories?
I had been in command about 2 weeks, and we had a 19-year-old young junior single enlisted female sailor who killed herself in the barracks, committed suicide. That was probably the worst day. And I can still remember, I lived, as I said, at the Rockefeller building. She killed herself in the barracks, which are, you could see it from my quarters. And when my duty officer called me to tell me, I said, hey, look, I'm going to come over. And I can still remember going into her room and seeing her there, as unfortunately a dead body, and trying to figure out what I could have done different to try to help this young lady, and what would have led her to decide that she found herself in a place where she felt the only choice she had was to take her own life, and then having to talk to her parents. That was probably the worst day.
Did you receive any special awards or decorations while you were assigned to Winter Harbor?
Oh, I mean, I got a medal, but none of that stuff matters. The biggest takeaway for me was every day I felt pride in what I was doing, and I was proud to be part of the Winter Harbor team, and I respected and really cared about the people that I worked with, and I loved the mission we were doing. So I was a very fortunate man.
Do you recall any national news events that headlined during your time at Winter Harbor?
Well, Y2K probably, just the transition. Like I said, entering the millennium, the 2000s there, that was kind of neat. I can remember the first we were there when the first big cruise ship started going into Bar Harbor. Queen Elizabeth pulled, I think it was Queen Elizabeth or Queen Mary I pulled in when I was there. I can remember looking at it across Frenchman's Bay from Winter Harbor and thinking, man, that's a big ship. And ice storms. The other big thing I remember is some really amazing ice storms in the wintertime. Just trees down, power lines down, no power. We had our own emergency generators on the base, bringing people in from downtown, sending our ambulance and fire crews into town to try to help. Winter Harbor and Gouldsboro deal with challenges during the course of the 2 years I was out there. I always really liked that.
What were your primary concerns and motivations as a Navy person during the time you spent there?
Primary concerns. Well, as a commanding officer, my primary concern always was making sure I was executing the mission, but doing it in a safe and legal manner, and also making sure that we were taking care of our people and that our people were preparing themselves for the future, and that they were taking advantage of what was available in Winter Harbor. What was the second part? It was what were my concerns, and what was the second part of the question?
Motivations.
Oh, motivations. Just to make sure I fulfilled my obligations to the citizens of the United States and to the oath I took as a commissioned officer, and making sure I was doing my part to represent the men and women that I was fortunate enough to work with.
When did you transfer from Winter Harbor, and where did you go afterward?
I left in June of 2002, and in fact, I'm the last CO, the last commanding officer who did a full 2-year command tour. Most command tours generally are 2 years. I was the last one to do a full command tour. In fact, you were talking about challenges, one I should have talked about. The initial planning for the closure occurred on my watch, so during my time, I did the initial interaction with the local community, with the Maine congressional delegation. The governor at the time was Angus King, currently now the U.S. Senator. He came up to see us, so I walked him through the closure. I can remember multiple town halls out in the community, Winter Harbor, Gouldsboro, talking about, hey, this is the timeline, here's how we're going to do it. Sitting down with the school board, talking about how we were going to do the closure, how we were going to do the drawdown, how I thought it was going to impact the student population and the public school system, talking to the congressional delegation, then Congressman Baldacci, as well as Senators Collin, and boy, I'm blanking out, and Senator Snow, about the closure and making sure everybody knew what we were doing. And then that was kind of my role. And then there were two commanding officers after me because we closed the site. The mission shut down. If my memory's right, and I could well be off. If my memory's right, we closed the mission in about 2003, and then we finished closing the site in the 2004-2005 time frame. So there were two commanding officers after me, and they ended up, closing down the mission. They ended up closing out the site, which is always a lot of work.
What do you remember as the general reaction from both the public and personnel on the base when you were informed that it would be to close?
Always sadness. We had been there since the 1930s. So during my time there, we had the 65th anniversary. So it had been there a long time. We had always been significant in working with the community in terms of volunteer, the Lobster Fest, fireworks. I can remember sitting down with Mr. Dixon because I had government money that I could apply not only for my crew on the base, but I also wanted to make sure we were trying to help the community. So I can remember meeting with Mr. Dixon multiple times about, hey, if you'll contribute this much money, I think I can bring this much money to the table. Hey, here's what I think we can do for the town. 4th of July fireworks we used to partner on, Lobster Fest, trying to help clean up, provide medical services. We would do all that stuff with the community. Security, making sure our police were working with the Winter Harbor and the Gouldsboro police, making sure our sailors were making smart decisions on the road. Generally we would bring sailors from all over the United States, many of whom had never driven in winter conditions before, and I can well remember every winter it never failed. We'd always get black ice, and I'd have sailors going off the road. They're just not used to it, driving too fast. Or, bad ice storms, trying to help out not just ourselves, but help out the community. But in general, I can remember frustration, the local public very frustrated with, hey, look, you've been a big part of our town for all of our lives here. The Navy culture always teaches us about volunteering, about giving back to communities wherever we are around the world. The community was concerned, hey, you're a big source of volunteers, you're a big driving spirit in getting us to do things. Hey, you guys are gonna leave. You bring a lot of experience from away. We appreciate that as a community, the chance to get to talk to people, get to know, establish relationships, become friends with people who've served all over the world, come from all different parts of the United States as they serve the nation. There was frustration, concern about what's the economic impact. Boy, there's a lot of money that flows from local contractors that isn't going to be there anymore when the base shuts down. And then, hey, look, is this really the right thing to do? And trying to walk people through, hey, here's why we're doing it. It's no reflection on Maine. It's no reflection on the communities. It's purely a reflection on technology is going to enable us to do the mission differently. We'll be able to do it in a less expensive manner because, quite frankly, maintaining a base like Winter Harbor was not inexpensive. The budget was in the millions of dollars. So it wasn't a cheap place or inexpensive place to run.
How did being stationed at Winter Harbor affect your life?
Oh, I always go back. Even now, I maintain relationships with people up there. I don't get to go back as much as I would like, but my wife Dana is back every year or so. Like I said, we bought land up there, so I intend to build something permanent up there and live up there. Boy, Admiral Stevens told me it was a tour that he said it was one of the best things I could ever do for you. I think you and your family will love it. I went up there with a wife and two children, two boys. They were 10 and 6 when we first got there in 1998. So for them, they just loved it. They could go out and play with their friends, play out and um, all over the base. We never had to worry about their safety. I never had to worry about their security. I didn't have to worry about drugs. I didn't have to worry about violence. And we had youth programs. We had a lot of sports programs. I loved playing sports out there. I was a big participant in all the intramural sports we used to have. I always loved that. Broke my, in fact, I split my face open one time playing football when I was out there, so I got stitched out one day on the football field out at Schoodic. Um, but it was great. It has been one of the best things that ever happened to me, and I intend to go back and take full advantage of it. I really love it. Even now, I love going out to Schoodic Point. I love seeing the changes that the Park Service has made to the base. I love the fact that it continues in a different way, but it continues, and much of the infrastructure that was there when I was there, is still being used. I think that's great for the citizens of the United States. I think it's great for the Winter Harbor and Gouldsboro community. I think it's great for the park and for Maine.
How do you feel about what the Schoodic Institute and CERC has done with the base?
Now, it's great to see the changes they made. Like I said, the one thing I kid with them is, I wish you had kept the galley. I think that would have been great. And then I wish the gym was still around. We used to have a gymnasium up on the very top at the high point. It's a parking lot now, but and I kept it unlocked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I would go up there at night by myself at times with my sons, and they'd throw a basketball around, and I'd weight lift. I wish that was still there. But it's nice to see they tore down what had been our commissary, but they built a beautiful auditorium. That's great. They use it, which is great to see. They still use our public works building up there for the exact same purpose. They converted what had been our chapel into some office space and laboratory space. That's great to see. They took our child care center and our bowling alley that had been up there, converted them. The bowling alley is now lodging for people, which is great. They kept some of the morale, welfare, and rec cabins we had there. We had built about 3 large cabins up there that we used to rent. We used to get people came from all over the United States to rent our cabins up there. You had to have a military connection to use them, but it was a big fundraiser for us to generate money, much of which went to do those things like that 4th of July fireworks display we always paid for every year. And then the Chiefs Club, which in some ways was the very best thing there. That was always the social hub at night. You go up there, socialize with everybody. Beautiful view, looked out over our athletic fields. You could see the Schoodic Head right there. I used to love to climb up there, and you could look down. Beautiful. And we had a recreational vehicle area. We had some portable trailers, again, that we used to rent. People would use for temporary lodging. Our crews would use it for temporary lodging when they first reported aboard and they didn't have a place to live yet. We had a BOQ out there. I stayed there with my family both when I first reported aboard, and then we lived in it as we were getting ready to leave, and we moved out of our quarters so they could prepare them for the new commanding officer. Really loved it. But that club, which is nice to see they are expanding it, that was just great. It was built by hand in the 60s by the crew that was there at the time. They built it all by hand, and it became kind of a recreational center for everybody. When I was there, I had them install satellite television access so we could watch football games and sporting events on the weekends, which was always a blast. The whole crew would be up there watching professional football and college football. That was a lot of fun. We used to have DJs up there on Friday and Saturday nights. It had a bar, which I really liked, so that was a lot of fun.
Is there anything else you would like to add that we have not covered in this interview?
No, not that I can think of, other than I will always be grateful for my time at Naval Security Group Activity Winter Harbor and for the chance to live for 2 years down east, to get to know the local communities, and to live in a national park in a historic landmark that is just so beautiful. I consider myself a very lucky man and much richer for the experience, both professionally, what I learned there as a naval officer, what I learned there as a leader, but also, perhaps most importantly, just as an individual, as a person, and as a citizen of the U.S.
Well, lastly, I'd like to thank you for your time and, of course, thank you for your service.
No, thank you, Jasper, and thanks for doing this project.